What's going on, guys? Thanks so much for clicking on the video. So yes, man, yes, Bloober team finally released a game overview for Cronos: The New Dawn. I'm just going to go ahead. I'll play the overview that they put up in the background, and I'll just give you guys my thoughts. So let's get into it. So right off the bat, they're asked where they got their inspiration, and first thing they say is from the Dark TV series on Netflix. Haven't really watched it. I think I've seen a trailer on it. So, I can't speak too much on the reference, but, again, based off of what I've seen, looks pretty cool. I think they're mostly probably referring to the time travel aspect of that show, I think. They brought up Dead Space, where they're saying that the protagonist in Cronos is going to be very similar to the protagonist in Dead Space, Isaac, which is really cool. I just like how much they referenced Dead Space a lot, being a big fan of Dead Space. They brought up 12 Monkeys, which is awesome. If you haven't seen 12 Monkeys, go watch it. And then lastly, they brought up Dark Souls as far as like the difficulty level. That's really, really cool. I don't know if maybe it's going to be as hard as a Souls game. The first time I ever played a Souls game, I was like, what am I doing? Now, it's not as bad. But yeah, I'll never forget the first time I played a Souls game. I straight sucked at Dark Souls. So they go into, you play as a traveler. That's what they call the protagonist, a traveler. And you're searching for time rifts where you're going back in time trying to survive encounters with these monsters. Okay, so I don't know if you're trying to save anybody or what you're really trying to do, but that time aspect of it, right, seems really, really, really cool. Going into the world, they described it as an alternate history where the world ends in the 80s by an apocalyptic event they called The Change, which is really cool. Speaking on, they didn't really speak too much on, quote unquote, what the change is. Obviously, they're probably going to get more in depth with that as time goes on before release. But again, interesting. The creatures this is really cool. The creatures, they call them the orphans, which yes, it's cool, but I thought that was also equally as creepy because they go into detail about how they can take different forms and they're focused on body horror, right? And I thought that was really cool. Speaking of body horror, orphans, calling them that, made from human flesh, that's very, very, very interesting. I'm very, eager to hear more about the enemies in the game. Speaking of the enemies, they were inspired a lot by the movie The Thing. If you haven't seen The Thing, I'm sorry. Please go watch The Thing. But yeah, again, very, very cool. They want them, again, because they want them to be created from human flesh, I think that you really just can't go wrong with that. Kind of like where there was a alien presence on the Ishimura, and then they turned all the crew members into these necromorphs. But again, from human, I think that's good. They go into these questions. Will there be ladders in the game? Someone asked, and they said, yes, there's going to be ladders. Will there be locations with huge walls of flesh? And they go, yeah, right, because there was one in the trailer that we saw in the very end where they show a small snippet, like 11 seconds or 8 seconds or so, of actual gameplay in that first initial trailer. So again, yeah, that's going to be nice. Then someone asked, which this is debatable, but will there be aliens? So they say they don't really want to spoil too much. So based on what I got from that, I think that there will be aliens in the game. However, I don't necessarily think, based off of how they've described these creatures in a very brief way so far, I don't really think that there necessarily needs to be aliens in the game. I think if there is, cool. It's not going to bother me. If there isn't, also won't bother me. I just think that how they have these, fleshed out so far, no pun intended, I think that these enemies are interesting enough to where maybe we don't necessarily need aliens. But again, doesn't matter. No, whichever route they take, I know it's going to be awesome. Will there be melee? That was asked. And then they say yes. So again, personally, I don't think with the melee, I don't think it's going to be like to the level of the Callisto Protocol. I think it's going to be, again, because Dead Space was heavily referenced with a lot of things. I think that it's going to be more like Dead Space, where you hit the trigger, you could swing or just try to punch a necromorph, right? Or you could stomp. But again, 90%, maybe even more of the game, you're not really doing that. You're stomping a lot, to get resources, but you're not really using melee as a means to kill the enemies. So I think it would probably be more along the lines of Dead Space rather than the Callisto Protocol, where you're doing a lot more melee. This was asked, this was nice. Will there be a flamethrower? And then they said kind of. So, again, me personally, I think that, okay, maybe, sure, there will be an actual quote-unquote flamethrower in the game, but I think maybe, hear me out, maybe fire will be just an element to the game that is more important than just a flamethrower, using it as a flamethrower. Maybe it would be more along the lines of in Dead Space, where you have that telekinesis, you use stasis modules. Maybe it'll be like that. So, you can rip through these enemies, but the only way that you're actually going to kill them for good, where they don't get back up, is fire. I mean, how cool would that be, right? And you just get something, maybe there's something built into the suit where he can use it. And yeah, the only thing that you can do to make sure that they stay down is use fire. I think that would be awesome. That'd be so, so cool. Then they got asked, will there be bosses? And they got, they got comically excited and they say, yes, there's going to be bosses. Again, Dead Space. Keep going back to Dead Space. I think it's probably going to be bosses like Dead Space, right? Where, yes, there's quote-unquote bosses, and some of them are obvious, and maybe some of them, won't be as obvious. But yes, I think that there's going to be enemies that are obviously harder, but might not be a quote-unquote boss level. I think that maybe you'll have one or two in the game like you did in Dead Space, but, not a ton. Again, with all these Dead Space references, I really think that that's the route they're going. This is awesome. This just makes me really excited. It should make, if you're a big fan of Dead Space, it should make you all excited. They ask this, is the old lady from the trailer Marie Curie? So I don't know a lot about Marie Curie at all to talk about her, other than the fact that I think that she's, I don't know, she's a really important scientist. I'm not going to talk about something I don't know. But yeah, I think that she's one of the most important scientists, or like influential scientists of all time, something like that. I don't know. But they say that it isn't Marie Curie, right? But she could be used, I guess, as a role model for the character that is in the game, that was in that trailer. This was asked. This is nice. Here we go. Will there be dismemberment like in Dead Space? And they say yes, but it's not going to be just like... They didn't say that it was going to be just like Dead Space, but me personally, I think that they're obviously not just going to say, oh yeah, it's going to be just like Dead Space. You know what I mean? You'll be dismembering these orphans, and that's the X factor to the game. No, that was the X factor of Dead Space. The dismemberment, to cut off the legs, cut off the arms. They still crawl at you. That was Dead Space's X factor, and they can't just say, oh yeah, we're going to do exactly that. So will you be able to cut off limbs in Cronos the New Dawn? I think absolutely. But again, it's not going to be that X factor. I think, and I could be completely wrong, back to what I said, I think that the X factor of this game is going to be probably the narrative. But besides that, maybe one up on that, fire. Because he says fire is going to be a very important aspect of their game. I think that that's all I have for you guys. That was a really good gameplay overview. And made me, I hope all of you, more excited for Cronos the New Dawn when it releases later this year. I'd like to see you guys, put your comments in the comment section. I want to know what you guys think. Smash that like button, maybe subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you guys in the next one with more Cronos the New Dawn news when they release it. Thanks, guys. Peace.